Welcome back, Twisters. Nick here, and I'm continuing my 2021 Stanley Cup Playoffs preview videos, and today we're going to be talking about the Toronto Maple Leafs against the Montreal Canadiens. So the way I'm going to do this is I'll look at the season series between these two teams, I'll look at their various records, the key team statistics, I'll tell you 5 things to watch for in this series, and then ultimately, I'll make my prediction, and I welcome your predictions down in the comments below. I'm sure we'll have some lively debate there. Before I jump into this, though, if you haven't already, check out my Maple Leafs playoff song. I've got a link to that in the description down below. If you're a Leafs hater or not a Leafs fan, you'll still get a good chuckle out of this, so I don't want you to miss out on that. So let's dive into this, ladies and gents. So on the season series, Toronto won 7 of these 10 contests. They were 7-2-1 against the Habs and outscored them overall 34-25. The Canadiens actually won 3 of those matchups, but one of them was in overtime, so they were 3-6-1 against the Leafs. And then since April 28th, the Leafs are 3-0-1 against Montreal and have outscored them 14-8. Let's look at the various records for these two teams. So the Maple Leafs on the season finished 35-13-7, good for 77 points, and the North Division, they were 7-1-2 in their past 10 games. So that one regulation loss is the fewest out of any NHL team. They were 18-7-3 at home and 17-6-4 away from home. That's pretty good. And as for the Canadiens, 24-21-11. Good for 59 points, nearly had third place there, but the Jets snatched that at the end. The Habs were 4-4-2 in their last 10. They were 13-11-4 at the Bell Center and 11-10-7 on the road. Now let's look at the key team statistics. So points percentage, just real quick. Toronto finished 5th in the league, Montreal 18th. Goals for 3.35 for the Maple Leafs. That was 6th. And the Canadiens finished with 2.82 goals for per game. That was 17th. Goals against, Toronto at 2.62. That was 7th. As for Montreal, 2.95. That was 18th. Power play percentage, so Toronto at 20.3%. That was just 16th. And the Habs were at 19.2%. That was tied for 18th. So not a big difference in special teams, as you'll see down this list here. So I also like to look at penalties drawn because more penalties drawn equal more power play opportunities. So the Maple Leafs drew 3.10 penalties per game. That was 25th, so that was among the fewest. And the Canadiens drew a little bit more at 3.22. That was 21st. On the other side of the coin, penalty kill. So the Leafs were 23rd in the league at 78.3%, and the Habs were marginally better at 78.5%. That was 22nd. Penalties committed, though, there is a little bit of a difference here. The Leafs were pretty disciplined. They were the 7th most disciplined team in the NHL, or tied for that mark. 7 minutes and 3 seconds of PIMS, and 8 minutes and 18 seconds of time in the box for the Canadiens. That was 19th. Shot disparity. So I take your shots for and I subtract your shots against just to see how that difference looks. So both of these teams were in the positive. So the Leafs averaged 3.3 more shots on goal than they surrendered per game. And for the Habs, it was 3.0. So pretty close there. And then faceoffs, the Leafs have quite an advantage here. They were at 51.1%. That was 10th. And the Canadiens were at 48.4%, which was tied for 24th. Now for the 5 things to watch for in this series. And of course, I could talk about how it's been 42 years since these teams met in the Stanley Cup playoffs back in 1979. Of course, the Habs had won against the Leafs the year before and won the cup in both 78 and 79, ending that great dynasty there. But that doesn't really affect what we see on the ice. At least I don't think. So here are my 5 storylines. First of all, I want to talk about Montreal's last 10 games. So I mentioned earlier they were 4-4-2. In their last 5 games, they were 0-3-2. So they surrendered. So I looked at 2 key stats here. So in those 5 games, they had surrendered 30.4 shots on goal per game. That's not too bad, but they had averaged just 26.4. And in that stretch, in those 5 games, they scored 0 power play goals. Let's look at the 5 games before that. The Habs won 4 out of those 5 games. So looking at those 2 stats again, opponents just averaged 25 shots on goal per game, and Montreal's power play was 5 for 15. So a big cornerstone to improving those statistics. We're going to talk about Shea Weber and Brendan Gallagher, and I know that the Habs have other injuries, Phillip Danault, Carey Price, But looking at Weber and Gallagher, Sportsnet a few days ago reported that these players are expected to be back in the lineup for the playoffs. Not sure if that means game one, but I'm assuming it will. So Weber had just 19 points in 48 games. But looking at that power play, as I was talking about just a moment ago, so Weber had 4 goals and 7 assists on the power play. So a lot of his contributions actually came with the man advantage. And then overall, really, Brendan Gallagher is the straw that stirs the drink for the Montreal Canadiens. The Habs won only 5 of their last 21 games in regulation with Gallagher out of the lineup. Storyline number 3, how are the Leafs going to manage their goaltending? It's not so much about who starts, but in terms of that dynamic of, all right, if one guy is not playing well, who gets slotted in? How big of a leash does that person have? So I'm assuming it's going to be Jack Campbell who gets the start. Even though Freddie Andersen is now back and has a game under his belt, Jack Campbell has just been fantastic, both in Toronto and for his career as a whole. In 21 starts, he has a record of 17-2-2. His goals against is 2.11, and he has a 922 save. As for Andersen, this has been his worst regular season with Toronto. In his previous 4 seasons, 916 save, 2.77 goals against, but this year, 2.96 goals against, 895 save. And in the playoffs, really, for Freddie, it's been kind of a mixed bag. He's played pretty well when the rest of his team hasn't, but there have been times as well where he hasn't exactly been helping their cause. So he hasn't really done enough to help them win a playoff series just yet. Whereas Campbell, I mean, really, his body of work is good enough to where he could start in the playoffs and we could see where things go from there. So editor in Leaf.com had pointed out maybe the Leafs approach this like they did, or like the Capitals did with Philip Grubauer and Braden Holtby in 2018 during their Cup run. Grubauer started the first 2 games. The team lost both of them. Holtby comes in and has a terrific playoffs the rest of the way. They win the Stanley Cup. Also, they have David Rittich and Michael Hutchinson. Hutchinson actually played very well for the Leafs in his 8 games this season. So it's going to be interesting to see, first of all, do they start Campbell? I think they should. I mean, look at, Anton Khudobin never had a postseason start until last season. Thatcher Demko got thrown in there as well, and both of them were excellent. So I think that's going to be the case with Campbell, but of course, let me know your thoughts in the comments below. Storyline number 4. This is really going to be a battle between the Leafs' even strength offense and the Canadiens' even strength defense. So Toronto finished with the second highest number of even strength goals in the NHL. The Canadiens were 14th in goals against 5-on-5. So the defensive pairing of Petry and Edmundson is certainly going to be crucial here. It's really interesting because among defensemen, they led the team in plus-minus. And they had very good Corsi. So in other words, they were good at limiting the number of chances that the other team got in the defensive zone for them, essentially. But the downside is that they combined for 144 giveaways in a shortened season. And Montreal overall was 4th in the league in turning the puck over. Toronto was actually 1st in giveaways, but they were 8th in takeaways too. So you got to take care of the puck and really strip things down, simplify your game as best as you can when you're trying to clear the puck and move it into a transition phase, essentially. So it's going to be interesting to see how much those guys are actually pressured. And then the return of Gallagher and Danault is going to be very critical here too. Danault has been a very good defensive forward for his career. And as for my last takeaway here, could be the last ride for Jumbo Joe Thornton and Jason Spezza. Of course, there are grizzled veterans on both sides. Corey Perry, Shea Weber, who's never won a cup. Wayne Simmons, he does have a cup as well. But Spezza and Thornton, I wanted to kind of narrow in on them because really, this could be their last years. So Spezza has been a pleasant surprise for Toronto so far. He had 30 points in 53 games, and his faceoffs, 56.7%, very good there. Although he did this with just under 11 minutes of ice time per game. But the thing is that in his last 7 games, he finished with just 8 minutes and 30 seconds of average time on ice, and he didn't have any points. So it'll be interesting to see exactly how much of a role he plays, if at all, in this series, really. And then Thornton, pretty good year for him in blue. In 43 games, he had 5 goals, 15 assists for 20 points, had a +6 rating, 13 minutes, 44 seconds average time on ice. It was interesting because kind of in the second half, the start of the second half, he went 17 games without a point. And then in the last 9 games, he tallied 8 points and had a +9 rating, even though his ice time dropped to just below 13 minutes. So Jumbo, I would think, would have a fairly good role going into this. As for Spezza, maybe he has a shorter leash. Of course, the Leafs might want to inject some more youth into the lineup and try to maybe outskate Montreal too. Now let's get into my prediction. So I think the Canadiens, now that they get a lot of critical personnel back, I think they're going to come back and be a stronger club than what we saw in the last 5 games. They'll have a better power play. They'll be able to hopefully contain Toronto a little bit better with guys like Gallagher and Danault returning to the lineup. But you look at the other side, you've got Jack Campbell, who's been an absolute brick wall in net for a lot of the season. There's no reason why he can't succeed against the Habs. They're not the most vaunted offense in the NHL. They have a lot of good players overall. I do like their makeup. The Leafs, I think overall, have enough firepower to outscore their mistakes, even though they're first in the league in giveaways. They're also good at taking over the puck. You look at someone like John Tavares, right? Matthews and Marner, of course, having a terrific season, but Tavares, 9 goals, 13 assists in his last 18 games. So even he's kind of flying in under the radar. And of course, the Leafs have kind of a good second wave of attackers with guys like Nylander and Hyman out there as well. So with that said, I think this is actually going to be a closer series than maybe some would let on. I'm going to take the Maple Leafs, but I say this goes the distance. 7 games. It's going to be Toronto. But let me know down in the comments below what your prediction is. Make sure you check out my other series previews. I've made a few others as well. And I know that I've predicted 5 of the 6 higher teams to move on. I still have to preview the West. And I have a pretty good feeling I'm going to call for at least one of the lower seeded teams to win. I wouldn't be all that surprised if both the Blues and the Wild upset the Knights and the Avalanche. So stick around for that. Make sure you subscribe, hit the like button, the notifications bell. Stick around. We've got plenty of more coverage in the playoffs. Check out our video description down below for a link to our merch store, excuse me. And you can follow me on social media as well. Thanks so much for tuning in, Twisters. Once again, I'm Nick, and I'll catch you Twisters later. Ciao.